Well, hello and welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. This is Jamie.
And I'm Malin.
We're back for a continuation of the cliffhanger we left you on last week on our narcissist series, Unmasking Narcissism. If you have not had a chance to check out our TikTok, please go do, because I had a little bit of fun.
You did have a little fun. And I just want to interject here. I feel like I'm the stuffy one, I guess, where I'm like, I need to give all the facts and I need to give all the reasons. You need to listen to us because of, and here's my dissertation. Your TikToks were fun, Jamie, because they made me laugh and they were different. So I actually enjoyed them. So if you haven't been to TikTok, go look at them. They'll make you giggle.
Free fun TikToks.
Well, and with the topic that we've been doing on narcissists, you almost kind of need that to be a little bit lighter because
right.
I tell you what, it's been cathartic for me, and it's also been challenging because when you talk about something that's so personal, like a family member or a relationship that's close to you, and you're trying to figure out how to navigate this, and you've never been exposed to it before, it's draining. And even to go back through it in an environment like this, and we had Dr. Krista on kind of help us. It's challenging, but it's kind of cathartic because there's an element to dealing with a narcissist, at least for me, where I felt like I have to keep this close to me because you don't want those ugly family secrets to be out in public. And this is kind of a way to finally exhale, if that makes sense, and kind of be like, it's okay to let people know that there's struggles, and in particular, the struggle.
Well, and I think you might have touched on it. I can't remember if you touched on it the last episode or if it's going to be on this episode, but I think part of that is too, when you're in that space and you've got someone who is actively trying to make you feel like you're the crazy one that's gaslighting you into feeling like you're the problem. I think that kind of adds to that isolation and that secrecy. I think that is, and we talked about that with Human AF, was, how isolating it can be when you're in these relationships, because that is, not only is that a tactic of someone who is like, I don't know, narcissistically abusing you, but it also, I think there's some shame and some guilt and some challenges that come with that make us kind of, I don't know, go back into ourselves too. So,
well, and as an adult, it's hard to admit when there's a situation that you can't handle or fix yourself. And so it's harder to ask for help because I'm supposed to fix this. I'm supposed to be able to deal with this on my own. And eventually I got there, but it took a while, and it took learning, and it took, the progression that I think is not really listed with any of these episodes with me is there took a lot of caring, a lot of not caring, a lot of just being mean, and then finally coming back to say, I just have to absolve myself that this relationship is not getting any better. So I almost have to become numb to it and just let it go. And I think that was the hard part because there was a lot of anger wrapped around, I was being mistreated, my wife was being mistreated, my family, my kids were being mistreated, and that's not fair. And that injustice alone made me very angry. And through, trial and error and learning and growing, I realized I was being my own prisoner, because this narcissist that's in my life, they didn't care how it was impacting me. They were caring how much control they were losing or how much control they could maintain. And so I had to realize that I had to make sure that I was safeguarding myself and my family more than just trying to get even or trying to fix the injustice that was happening. And I think once I got to that realization, things really kind of fell into place. So I know we're kind of doing a little intro here, but I do want to just take a moment to say, if you have not listened to any previous episode around narcissists, I would highly recommend you kind of pause here now, go to the first episode, which is with another podcast group that joined us called Being Human AF, where we discuss what narcissist is, that we got a kind of a little bit of a flavor between my my experience and then this other team's experience. Then part 2, which is just the last episode where I started going into some of those examples around my family member who I believe is a narcissist. And I start opening up with Dr. Krista around what does that look like. And, we're talking 25 years in the making here. And so the way I try to present the material and my experiences, I wanted to start out really small, like little things that were just by themselves. They wouldn't have triggered anything. But as you start collecting them like a snowball, it becomes more and more obvious. And so that's what, episode 2 was just kind of getting into some of those examples. This episode that you're going to listen to is kind of the culmination of the rest of examples of this person kind of being a narcissist. You'll see the examples progress even more, get a little bit crazy. And again, it's hard to take 25 years and sum it up even into two 1-hour episodes.
Right.
Yeah, 2.5 hours. So I'm hoping there's questions, and I'm hoping this generates follow-up, because I think a lot of people suffer from this. And I think talking about it helps, because otherwise it's very easy for you to start thinking you're crazy, you're the problem, and nobody's going to understand. And you're kind of left out on an island by yourself. And if nothing else, if none of these episodes do anything, I hope people just realize you're not on an island by yourself. And there are people out there who will understand if you just open up and start talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good stuff to come. So episode 9, season 2, episode 9 is that first episode. Season 2, episode 10 is the second episode. And you are just about to hear episode 3, which is going to be season 2, episode 11. And that'll be the conclusion of this conversation with Dr. Krista about unmasking narcissism. So we hope you enjoy.
Yes, unbelievable. So when we talk about the extremes, when you catch yourself catching your breath, or you're automatically having gestures, or when those situations happen, it's a good likelihood that it's related to, say, the personality disorder, or in this case, the dynamics you're describing, narcissism. So much like we briefly touched on all or nothing thinking, the splitting boundaries tend to be very horrible, because guess what? Everything is about me if I'm narcissistic. So I won't even go there to think that it's your fault that you didn't have that it's my fault that my kids sit on your porch, because you should have given me the key, because I deserve it, because I am who I am. Again, I'm being sarcastic, right? But that's the mindset. That's the self-fulfilled, indulging self-love. It's artificial, but that's the mindset. And that's the internal experience of the narcissist. And it sounds like there's kind of a combination. It'd be really interesting to dive into your mother-in-law's childhood and that sounds very shrinky, didn't it? But to their childhood, and see, like, is it more like, was she overindulged, or was she somehow underindulged? And it doesn't matter. That just helps understand it. And it helps to reinforce, validating what's going on with the dynamic. But the things that you're describing, it's a different version of the same verse, or it's a different verse that in the same song that you hear over and over when you talk about families who have to deal with narcissism. And whether you call it a mental illness or if you say it's a personality disorder, it is devastating to family dynamics. And it really does disrupt children. It does disrupt marriages of those people who enter into those systems. One of the things that we haven't talked about, and I don't know if you're going to, of like how you deal with that with your own children then. You don't want them to see this as a healthy model. The last thing I would want to do is have my children to think that this is okay, or the passivity of the grandpa is okay. I don't want my son growing up to be that passive, right? So that's my piece. Yeah. It'll see where it goes.
And that's towards the end, kind of when I was going to wrap this up, I was going to talk about how that starts affecting my kids or the generations, because there's again, I could talk for hours. I really could. But I want you to see the full breadth. And before I keep going, there's one thing that you said that I wasn't planning on asking, but it's presented itself. A lot of times, because my mother-in-law has been part of different counselings throughout the years and been to different counselors, and most of them tend to side with my mother-in-law. And what you just said was, oh, I'd really like to dive in and learn more. And, and I catch myself because I don't want to be a cynic, but at the same time, I wanted to be like, yes, but if you talk to my mother-in-law, because I don't think I believe she doesn't speak the truth, either because she doesn't recognize it or because she knows how it will make her look. So when she does go and have these conversations, it's through the lens of what I'll call lies. They're not true. And so then the people that are talking to her tend to be focusing on the people outside of her and how she needs to start interacting with them. But, give them some grace, cut them some slack when they hurt you. And it's like, you're missing the whole story here. The story is she's the one reaching out and causing all this pain of everybody else and trying to manipulate and move pieces around. So I hear what you're saying, and please, Krista, just know that I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying, like, that's one of the elements that I'm like, but you can't, at least with my mother-in-law, and I don't know if this is typical with people who have this, but they don't give you the story. So you're operating off of a certain lens that they want you to see through, and you're giving advice through that lens, but it's a falsehood. And so how do you overcome that? I mean, what would be the point of her with my mother-in-law? Let's just make it very specific. What would be the point for her to talk to anybody, to reach out for help, unless she was really looking for that change? Because most of the times she's being forced to go into these interactions, not because she wants to, because finally she's trying to appease people. And 9 times out of 10, she comes out of those environments with almost a, see, I told you it wasn't me. And here they talk to me and you guys are wrong and I'm right.
Good point. Notice I said I'd like to dive into her past, not hear it from her, because that specific dynamic. You're not gonna hear it from her. People with personality. Again, I don't put labels on people, and I don't like put people in these big stereotypes or buckets, right? But individuals who would meet criteria for a personality disorder don't seek treatment. Typically, they don't have insight or awareness of it, and they typically don't engage, or they present in a way that is different than the true dynamic. So if I'm working with someone, and we would hope that most professionals, if they're working with someone who present in this perfect way or presents I'm almost always want to hear, I'm going to play the devil's advocate with my client. Like, tell me what somebody else would say about you. Tell me about what the other person said in this interaction. Or, hey, let's bring so-and-so in. Or, you need to get other sources or you're not going to do your job well as a professional, bottom line. So I would say boo-hoo to those therapists because you got to get other people in there. You can't just hear one side of the story. That said, the other thing is that's what happens when you're old and cynical already because you've had enough, you've been lied to enough already. You can say, hey, I got to hear some other information. Hopefully that happens more in training also. So those young therapists can understand that as well. If a person with a personality disorder, especially something like narcissism, does seek treatment, it typically is going to be because somebody is forcing it or because they are upset because somebody else is hurting them. Sarcastic again, right? That somebody's doing this to me in that victim mentality. So there might be anxious or present as anxious, but mostly depressed and sad because my family just doesn't understand me and they're not good enough to me, blah, blah, blah. That type of a thing. And that to me is a big red flag. That needs to be recognized. And again, bring other people into that treatment process. So you almost always want additional information. In terms of the therapist or the counselor, it would be like if she ever did that, was willing or did seek treatment again, it would be like presenting, like your wife, for example, saying, hey, I'm feeling like I'm not sure that I've been the best daughter to you. So would you seek counseling with me? So then that counselor is going to hear the whole story and there's a potential then. But then there'll be the mother-in-law is going to say, oh, that's because this is your counselor and this is somebody who knows you better or likes you. They're just taking sides and it'll turn into that. It's going to be something like that. But you could still have the opportunity then for your mother-in-law to hear other information. Not going to promote change. So at this point, does it really matter? Choose your battles, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's that. I have 2 questions for you. Jumping off of what you just said. In my profession, we choose to believe that change is possible for everyone. Mental health recovery, mental wellness is possible for everyone. This feels like a space where it's not necessarily possible. Because of that difficulty in being self-reflective and being able to accept personal responsibility and things like that, However, and I do think I mentioned this the last time we talked about this, Malin, was that I have seen a couple of creators on social media who are talking about how I'm a narcissist in recovery, or, it's kind of fascinating to me because that feels a little bit like the diamond in the rough, right? So I guess what are, I don't know, I statistics, I don't know what the question is, but how possible is recovery when we're talking about narcissistic personality disorder, when they're so deep that it is diagnosable as narcissistic personality disorder?
From the clinical pristine perspective, the prognosis is very poor. Research shows that, anecdotal evidence shows that it's like taking a bunch of habits, our habits of the way we think, feel, and behave, and trying to break those habits. Think about if you're a gum chewer or a cigarette smoker, or maybe just a knuckle cracker. This seems to be mostly just a behavior. How hard it is to break habits. You're going to take this person's whole self and try to break that habit. Very, very difficult. And so the prognosis is poor, even with treatment. When it happens, it's I'd say it's analogous to like addictions. Rock bottom must be hit, but it's difficult to get there with personality disorders because families reinforce the behavior, reinforce the dynamic, because just keep the peace. In your family, if it's not in my family, I might be going like, oh, that person has narcissistic personality disorder. If it's in my family, I might be going, oh, that's just Aunt Susie.
Right.
Or that's my mom. It is just what it is. So you're going to have those dynamics.
Well, because you're almost trained up.
Yes.
Yeah. You're trained up to reinforce that.
Likewise, there's a deep-seated, if you grow up with someone who has narcissism, they're so into themselves, they are going to have a difficult time meeting that internal, unconditional, positive regard need of their offspring, of their child. So they're kind of caught in creating, one, they don't know what's different. They don't know anything different, but they're also caught in it because from an emotional standpoint, it's like they want to be loved. They want to be nurtured. But if a person is narcissistic, it's going to possibly minimize their ability to do that with their child, to offer those needs. So those children are going to reinforce it.
It's like you're a pro podcaster because you just teed up my other question, which is what happens to the children of narcissistic parents? Like what do you often see? I guess, yeah. What happens to those kids? If you've got a family with 5 kids, I'm sure the outcomes will be 5 different outcomes. But what do you often see coming from families where a parent is narcissistic and possibly abusing their children narcissistically?
If somehow any of my students were listening, this is the response they would want me to give. It depends, right? The classic best, the most appropriate answer for a good clinical psychologist is it depends. It gives pause to think about all the factors that play a role. So without a doubt, a primary caregiver depends on which primary caregiver, gender does matter, and it depends on the subculture of the family. Are there any other healthy family members? Is there one healthy role model? So like for Malin's wife, starting to see that there's this other family and the way Malin's family interacts, like, but she probably also was introduced to that growing up. And so depending on the allowability of the offspring or the children to interact and see other situations, that's going to have a big influence on how they quote unquote turn out. Does that make sense? I don't know if I was very clear in that. So if they have opportunities to see other positive family dynamics or relationships, then it's going to impact them in a helpful way. They're never necessarily going to get some of their own core nurturing and feeling loved needs met because the narcissistic parent's so busy loving themselves and may not be capable of loving in that way. The other thing is with the narcissistic dynamic, the children, like you said, all 5 might be very, very different. However, they might have one thing in common. To a point, whatever the boiling point or whatever the other outside sources, like Malin became one, right, for his wife, whatever those outside sources, there's a boiling point. There's a point where most of the offspring will say, I've had enough, or addictions, increased risk of addictions, increased risk of also maybe if the child could kind of have that whole neglectful, aggressive type of development of narcissism for themselves because their needs weren't met. So then they need to they don't feel worthy. And so they might develop some of those characteristics. But again, it really depends on all the other factors that are in there. There's that they experience, excuse me. So it's kind of like there's a genetic predisposition, plus the growing up, there's some environmental factors that influence them. And then whatever those lifelong and developmental milestones look like will play a major role in that and how they turn out, so to speak. A lot of factors, bottom line.
Well, and I am not as educated as you in this field by any means. So I'm going to be, I get my PhD from psychology from Google. So just let that sink in for a second. So it's not like in depth at all. But, reading articles, there's one thing that, and I don't think my wife would mind sharing, like having me share this. There's one thing in looking at articles that she kind of gravitated towards. And children of narcissists, there's almost like this family dynamic where one's the black sheep, I think one's the scapegoat, one's the golden child, and there was something else. Like, it really resonated. And for whatever reason, my wife, for the longest time, was the one that she blamed the bad things that happened. It was because of my wife. And she would do it subtly sometimes. Sometimes she wouldn't be subtle. Sometimes she would be ugly about it. But it always had that tone of, well, it's your fault that this is happening. It's your fault that I did this to you. It's what, put in the blank. It's because of my wife. And then on one of these kids, they could do no wrong. The sun literally rose and set on this child. They could be going to the jail to bail them out. This did not happen. This is just an example, like made up fictional example. But they could be on their way to the police to bail them out for this person to be driving drunk. And they would be like, all the reasons why it wasn't their fault. They would welcome them with opening arms. Meanwhile, my wife might have thrown or spilled a glass of water on a brand new rug. And suddenly, we can never have nice things. You ruin everything. Why can't you be more careful? I mean, it's a weird dynamic. But one layer that goes a little bit deeper is that, and I believe from my relationships and my interactions with my mother-in-law, she picked the child to be the golden child because this, in her eyes, this is what's really twisted. This child in life as an adult is going to struggle in certain areas, so therefore was not as pretty or socially acceptable or going to be financially as comfortable as maybe my mother-in-law. So almost it was like she could see this child as less than. So then there was no competition. There was no threat. There was nothing. So therefore, it doesn't matter to them what their life turns out, because no matter what they do, even on their best day, they're going to be short of achieving the life that she had.
Well, and
the other children
always needing a hero, always needing a savior, right? I mean, that's
well, and again, this is me reading into it. I have no pedigree at all, but that's what it seemed like. It really did. It really seemed like I'm okay to let you be the golden child because I can beat you in every aspect of your life, even if you were firing on all cylinders. Whereas the kids that provided the potential threats were the ones that had either the scapegoat, and I forget the terms. I hope I'm using them correctly. And Krista, if there's other ones I need to be using, please educate us. But I just want to kind of pull that in there because that was something I was going to wait to maybe talk to at the end, because these are things that are coming up in my personal experience. But I'll pause there just to see if you had anything else you want to weigh in on.
I think the way you described it in terms of like the scapegoat and the black sheep tend to be very similar, but there can be differences in those two. The scapegoat tends to need to be admonished and definitely is directly treated in a less favorable fashion, whereas sometimes the black sheep is just kind of dismissed. Then you do have that golden child dynamic or the hero. Those are some of the main ones. Sometimes you kind of get that lost child in there, and where they really don't have an identity. They're just surviving. They're just or they may just be dismissing it and kind of just not in tune, but different than the black sheep. And so, without a doubt, those dynamics are fairly common when you have a personality disordered parent in a dynamic, especially narcissism or bipolar disorder, and those kinds of very relationship intensive and internally threatened, the individual with the disorder, so internally threatened and insecure at a deep level, so they need to project something different, right? So I think you're right on with that. In terms of like, if the family had someone who maybe was less strong, I could definitely see that dynamic play out where, yeah, they're never going to measure to where I've been anyway. And so they aren't seen as a threat. That could be the golden child. the other dynamic that can happen, say there's not someone who is less strong. Again, multiple dynamics could play out, but oftentimes it's going to be the child that maybe if there's a separation in ages and there's a youngest one, that might be that baby child who becomes like, cannot do wrong, or the one that's most resistant. Like, I'm just going to have this weird shift in thinking that this person is amazing and doesn't do anything wrong because I'm going to pretend that they're not treating me poorly or that they're not rejecting me. So you see that dynamic as well. Most of that is anecdotal. I don't have any research to support that, but I think the dynamic as you described it could be the case sometimes and could play it that way. But there's so many other factors that play a role. As soon as, like, if there's a point where the person with narcissism is really threatened or really challenged, at any minute they could flip. One other thing I really wanted to quickly point out is the type of thinking that's happening. You described all or nothing thinking. You've described the, like, no boundaries, and even in their thinking, then it's like there is no conceptualization of where I end and somebody else begins, or except for that I get to control everything, right? And that my boundary is me, and it doesn't matter. It's invasive of everybody else's. Overgeneralizations. So in those discussions, it's going to be illogical because their thinking is illogical. Mountains out of molehills, overgeneralizations, stereotypical behavior, all those things are going to feed into the dynamic. And depending on what role, the children don't know which end is up, what's real or not real, because the truth or even situations are altered, almost like gaslighting, but are altered depending on what the person who has the narcissistic tendencies sees it. Whatever plays in their way to go to their favor, they're going to see it. And so the life becomes very unpredictable for the children.
That makes perfect sense. So one of the things I wanted to highlight is, I was dealing with things where actions didn't line up with the words anymore. So the mask is slipping even more now because we're getting older. My wife and I will say in this relationship, we're getting stronger to be pushing back and saying, we're getting to the point where we're setting a boundary. We don't care if you like it or not. You are going to follow it. Like, that's kind of where we're at. Her other kids are getting older, so they're starting to date. There's other influences starting to come in. So you can start seeing that my mother-in-law is losing more and more control. And I think that also fed into the accelerant of, like, now she's not able to mask these behaviors as easily as she did before, is kind of what I'm getting to. So we would start seeing things like when there was a fight, my mother-in-law would send very detailed either letters in the mail or text messages or even emails. And I won't read any one of them because I don't think it's important, but I think the language and the tone in them is what really kind of struck me because at first they came in, there was no apology. And so we would have to respond back. And then there was back and forth. And then we'd get into another argument. And then there would be these letters and text messages and stuff. So then we would respond because there would be no apology. And then we learned, she's not really doing this to even apologize or even want resolution. She's doing this because we are taking a step back, and she's pulling us back into the conversation, into the relationship, because she's still controlling how we interact with her and when we interact with her. So then we started getting smarter, and it was like, okay, we're not going to do any of this. And so we held our firm. So then the letters started changing. So then there was apologies, but the apologies were, I'm sorry if you think this happened, or I'm sorry that you think X, Y, and Z, or I'm really sorry that I did that to you, but you did this to me. And then that would be a paragraph on that, and then 3 or 4 or 5 pages of how we wronged her. So that was the next evolution of these kind of conversations. And then it got to the point where we had our boundaries, they were firm, and then the pleading started. And I'm going to give you this one example. But before I do that, I also will say there were very hurtful things that I heard my mother-in-law say to her own children that I could not grasp. One of which was, and it was coming up more and more as my mother-in-law got older, which is, I never had a childhood because I had my wife. I had you early in life, and so I had to be a parent pretty early on. Almost like it was my wife's fault that she got pregnant when she did, or she became a parent when she did, and there's nothing my wife can do to change that. And so it almost became this poor me. I never got the the fun times of my life because I had to start raising you. And those weren't always the words, but those were the tones. And so you start having those conversations, and then it started getting directed towards her other children. And one case in point is one of her siblings she was really good in sports. They all were pretty athletic, but this one was really good in sports. And she played the last of her high school career, and she was done. And, parents go out and usually they congratulate. And the first words out of my mother-in-law's mouth to her is something along the fact of, well, now you're not going to be as skinny as you are now. You're going to start getting fat because you don't have sports. And it was a moment of, this is something coming to an end. And for my mother-in-law, it was, see, now you're not going to be, because you're so thin, that's not going to happen anymore because you've lost that. Another aspect of it is, I heard her say at another time, well, it was good to get my time back because I spent so much time at those stupid little sporting games, having to watch them play. And again, there's always this tone of, I had to sacrifice for you. I had to put in, I was giving something up for you. I want you to always understand that. But it really came across as hurtful. So there's these things starting to bubble up too. So it was Christmas time. Like I said, a lot of these happen around the holidays. And we, for the first time, we're staying home. We're having Christmas as a family. We can come after, but we're not coming during. And my mother-in-law always started asking around Thanksgiving because she did adapt a little bit. I can't sit here and say she didn't adapt. Whereas before, it was the night before, hey, you come into Thanksgiving. Hey, you're coming to Christmas. It's now the eve of Thanksgiving. What are you guys doing for Christmas? Because I got to book you. And we said, well, we're not traveling this year. So then my mother-in-law spent weeks hounding my wife. I really want you to come. Please come. No, we're going to stay home. We're going to have all your favorite foods. Family's coming in. We really want you there. I mean, just on and on and on. And it finally got to the point she goes, well, I didn't want to say something, but I really have an amazing gift for you. And I want you to be here. And I want you to see, I want to see you when you open it. And it's really special. And can you please just come? Because I really want you to have it. So my wife came to me and was like, Malin, I'm really kind of excited. Can we do this? And not asking my permission, but just talking through it, right? Like, hey, what do you think? And so I was like, if that's really important to you, then let's go. We'll go and see what they have. At the time, we were also saving up so we could buy a shed because we needed a shed because we were outgrowing the house we were in and needed a shed. So we go to Christmas and we're sitting there and I have a couple gifts and my wife has nothing and everybody has all these presents and they're opening them. And I remember we were going through some stuff and kids were opening tons of stuff, gaming systems, new clothes. I think it was an automatic car starter for their oldest child other than my wife. And I even opened up it was like a check for like a certain dollar amount to go towards us buying the shed, but it was addressed to me. And then it was getting close to the end. And my mother-in-law said to one of my wife's siblings, oh, go get my wife's present out of my closet. And this beautifully wrapped box came and my wife started opening it. And inside of it was a pair of my mother-in-law's old shoes, used shoes. And, my wife got upset and she started crying and she put it down and went downstairs. And I went down there to console her. And all of this buildup, all of this was to get her to come to Christmas. But it was almost like a punishment to say, this is how little I thought of you, that I wanted to give you shoes for my closet. And the way that my mother-in-law spun it was, oh, these are really expensive shoes. And I just thought you don't really have any expensive shoes, that you would really like to have a pair of my shoes. And that was probably one of, I'll say, the last three times we've ever went there. I have another Christmas story that was the pinnacle of our relationship. And there was one other Christmas that something so disturbing happened that I kind of want to get your opinion on. But I'll pause there to see if there's any reflections from anybody else, because now we're really getting into the heart of this relationship and the damage that is now not even being hidden from anybody anymore in the family. Like it's openly being displayed.
Mm-hmm. The themes, self-victimization, poor me, guilt trips, they were already there, but they're becoming less subtle, punishing. And those things probably happened throughout the childhood of your wife as well. And that all of that dynamic you're all experiencing, but that heartache and that that she has something really special for me. It was well beyond whether it was an expensive gift. It was really about your wife getting a sense of love and caring is something she's special to her mom, right? To your mother-in-law. So just those things are so typical and I think you kind of alluded to it, but as her psyche and her control has been fractured, her sense of ability to manage it psychologically has obviously and behaviorally has become more and more fractured. And it's just going to become more and more obvious and blatant and just like mean. And setting those boundaries, keeping the distance and helping. I don't think I was asked my opinion on this, but continuing to assist your wife in recognizing the pain underneath of it and that she's never going to get these needs met. And it's never been about her. It's not whether she's worthy or not. It's not whether you're a worthy son-in-law or not. It is about, and that repeated thing, that repeated mantra to self of like, this isn't about me. This is about her. Everything's about her in her story. Everything's about her. This isn't because I'm not good enough. This is about, and at the end of the day, oftentimes those children do have that mindset of like, I'm not enough. I'm never going to be enough because they're set up to believe that.
Yeah. Thank you. And as I'm going back through, I should go check this. It might have been the same Christmas, but it might have been the year after. I can't remember. But this next story, where we were at, there was a big snowstorm, and we had 2 children at the time. So my daughter was 3, and my son was just like newbornish, like 2 months old, maybe not quite even 3 months, like really young. And they had our car at one of their other buildings because there was a lot of cars in the driveway, and they're like, hey, can we move your vehicle? And we said, sure. So they moved it to one of their buildings. Then we got the snowstorm, and we were young parents. We had maybe a 2 or 3 mile drive into town because they kind of lived outside of on the skirts of town. And I'll never forget this. They were running late, and we needed to get to Christmas dinner at my father-in-law's family's. And so we said, well, we need to get our car because it has the car seat for our youngest. And they were like, no, it's only a couple miles. Just put them in the car with us. We'll drive. And we didn't feel comfortable. It was snowy. We're new parents. We were like, no, we want everyone to be safe. Can you just go get our car? So they had to go get our car. And the whole time my mother-in-law is ranting and raving on how selfish we can be. And we're going to be late to Christmas and we need to be on time. And so I went, I think once they brought it, I went to make sure like the car seat stuff was in there. And when I got back, my mother-in-law was basically screaming at my wife, and my wife was very upset. And I heard, you just ruined Christmas. You always ruin Christmas, like things like that. And, now we're going to be late and it's all your fault. And, on the way there, I'm like, what is going on? And she was telling me the story of what I missed. And basically what I missed was, her mom was like, well, don't you think you're being a little silly? Like, let's just go into town. It take us longer to go get your car than just getting into town. Why can't we just get there? We're already running late. To the point it escalated to you're ruining Christmas. How can you be so selfish to everybody else in the family? You're holding up your grandparents. I mean, all this guilt that just was spilling out. And I remember just looking at my wife and I said, because we want our kids to be safe. That's why. If this was a sunny day, if this was a clear road, I might not have an issue with it, but I have an issue. Like, I'm not going to just take my newborn child and my 3-year-old and go on icy, snowy roads, even if it's 3 miles. I don't care. And so this is not just, it was like one of the first times I said, this is not just an issue that impacts you or a decision that impacts just you. It now impacts me because these are my children. And I said, I will not stand for this. And I remember saying, this will be the last Christmas we come to. And so I'm not proud of this, but I knew I needed to get a message to my mother-in-law. And so I did the only tactic that I knew that would work. One of my sister-in-laws at the time was 9 or 10 years old. So I made sure that she was in the room when I looked at my wife and I said, this will be the last Christmas we come back. We will never come back again. Because I knew I needed those little ears to take that message back to their mom. And it did. It delivered exactly. And do I feel proud about that? No, I don't at all. It's horrible, but that's what I did. It was now 3:00 in the morning of Christmas. We went to dinner. Everything was fine. We came back. We went down to bed. We were staying in one of the basement bedrooms. We get a knock on the door, and it's one of the only first times and only times my father-in-law got involved. And he was standing over us while my daughter was in the room, my son was in the bassinet, and we were asleep. And it was like, we need to talk. You need to come out here. And I said, my father-in-law's name, I said, we'll come out. Just let us get up and we'll be right outside. And I just need this to be known. There was an internal struggle with me because I was always raised that you show people respect in their own home. That's what my parents said. You're in their home, you will show them respect. I had to fight against that because I said, this might be my only shot. And so I literally took every filter that I had and just shut them off. And I met both of them, and my wife came with me, and we started talking. And I'm going to give you highlights because, again, it doesn't matter, but I just need you to know the tone and kind of what was being said. Because I had hit a point that now you've touched, almost like you said, right? Yeah, I can handle a lot, but you put on my kids, I'm done. And that's where I was at. I was done. And so I was throwing gasoline on this bridge that whatever weird warped bridge looked like between my mother-in-law and me was there. I was about ready to set it ablaze, and I didn't care. And we went round and round, and I finally looked at her and I said terms like, you have to understand that we don't care about how you feel about our decisions. We don't care if you're disappointed in us. We don't care that you dislike what's happening because it's not about you. And we went round and round and round. And I said, even now, I said, this is all like you coming into Christmas has nothing to do with what kind of relationship you want with us. It has everything to do with you telling us now's the time we need to have this argument because it's on your terms. Everything's always on your terms. And I said, I don't want a relationship like that. And she kind of retorted back like, see, he said he hates me. And he said, I don't hate you. But I said, if you died right now, I wouldn't shed a tear. Like, I don't have an emotional connection to you at all. Like, you're just something I have to deal with in my life. You're not something I want to have to engage with or want to have any kind of positive or any interaction with. Like, you are something I literally just have to deal with. And she looked at the audience and was like, see, he said he hates me. He wishes I was dead, blah, blah, blah. And so finally my wife's like, didn't say he wished you were dead. He's just being honest with you, brutally honest, but he's just being honest with you. And she saw that she wasn't getting any kind of support. So she said, well, I don't have to stand for this in my own house. I'm leaving. And I said some choice words, something to the fact of, well, don't let the door hit you on the way out. She stormed off, and we finished having a conversation with my father-in-law for about 10 minutes until she realized nobody was chasing after her. And then she came back. That moment right there solidified from that point on her dislike and disdain for me. The weird thing is, to my face, oh, we love you, Malin. You're part of the family, Malin. Behind closed doors and even behind the doors with the immediate family, I'm selfish. I come from a selfish family. I'm toxic. I only think about myself. I glossed over this, but they told stories that I took my wife and kids in the middle of the night and left when we moved, and they didn't even have a chance to see them. And so there's still people in their hometown that believe that I just left without saying goodbye, and I pretty much kidnapped my wife and kids. The problem with that is we have pictures of them helping us load the U-Haul the day that we left, and they were all there, and we said goodbyes, and it's just this weird reality that she's weaving that she has to portray to other people. I'm getting a little off topic. So that's kind of been the catalyst. That was the final meeting. That was like, this has now redefined our relationship. Just so we know, we're tolerating you not because we want to, but because we have to. And that was one of the last Christmases we went there. I do want to tell you a story about the last time we went there for Christmas, but I will take a breath to see if either one of you have any.
Any thoughts, Jamie? I always have thoughts.
No, I can't wait for you to hear the next story. That's why, like, oh, here we go.
I think the way you've described things, and you've indicated that the dad didn't get involved much, that whole notion of him even being able to not follow her was probably the biggest move he's ever made. And you made that happen. So I'm going somewhere that you probably didn't expect me to go. And I'm not a hero worshiper. I don't throw sunshine, unless it's true. But the reality is that probably him coming down to wake you guys up, since he didn't usually get involved, he just sat quiet or whatever, was probably in a desperation. It was like he was demanded to do that, right? And if he didn't, there was going to be whatever. consequence. But for him to not follow her, what an amazing thing that you helped make happen. Because he had probably not seen anybody stand up to her like so. That yay for you and yay for your wife, because that was just a healthy mechanism the way you described it. Okay. I did want to touch briefly on just broadly the notion of holidays and how when you sometimes hear people say, oh, holidays are so hard, this is the epitome of why, like, your wife and her siblings, that's what makes holidays hell for some people, along with substance use and all the things. But this type of a dynamic where, going into the holiday, somebody's going to do it. Jack's going to get drunk, or mom's going to say something stupid, or mom and so-and-so are going to get it. But it wasn't about you. Like, I'm talking about you, Maylin, like with you setting boundaries, that's healthy. That was good for your wife. It was good for you. And it's healthy, even though it did disrupt things. You weren't creating it, or it doesn't sound like, based upon the story, right? Though your wife wanted to keep the peace and just probably at some point was like, just put up with it. It was okay to not do that. It's probably very valuable and important, because you may not have gotten to this point where your wife can have still a lot of probably unresolved, strong emotions, wanting something from her mom that she'll never get, but it's never been about your wife, and it's really never been about you. It's about the unhealthiness of your mother-in-law.
Well, and even, I guess I was also thinking the amount of pressure that I put on myself to make sure that Christmas is perfect for my kids. I can only imagine how much bigger that must be for someone who has to have everything perfect and in the way that they think it should be perfect. I can only imagine how activating that must be for someone who's got that, that persona on themselves and from everyone around them. It's pretty heavy as a mom. You know what I mean? Like, you have all the Christmas magic. And then, that's probably why there was so much pressure to be back for Christmas, because that in her mind was the perfect Christmas, and she's going to make the perfect Christmas happen. And I hadn't even thought of some of those things too.
The reality is there's never going to be anything good enough. It's not because your wife's not good enough. It's because the individual who has the narcissistic tendencies at an unconscious level knows that they're not good enough, or believes they're not good enough, and they have to control, manipulate to make sure that nobody discovers their own insecurities. That's one of the theories about it. But like, given the dynamics that you're describing, which are actually kind of classic or textbook, not to minimize your situation, just to validate it, it's not difficult. The things that you've described, again, if I were working with you, I'd say, I need to hear somebody else. Bring in 2 or 3 other people in your family. Right. I need to hear that this is true. It's not, I don't want just your opinion, but given what you've shared, right on top, right consistent with that whole narcissistic family dynamic and narcissistic wound and need. But again, not an excuse, understanding it, but no, there's a point where you get to live your life.
Yeah. And I hope I'm doing justice. Like, my wife's is seeing this throughout the years, and she's starting to change and she's starting to understand. So I don't want to feel like I'm like having to do this all by myself, because she's been a rock and she's gaining, her voice as well. So like, we're kind of going through this together. I think what really accelerated for her, there was a moment in time when, because we're a big proponent of, we don't want to minimize or limit the circle of love that our kids have the opportunity of having. My mom told me that really early on, before we even have kids. We're to give our kids the biggest circle of love that we can. That's what they deserve. What we had to learn is we had to limit that circle around certain individuals. In this specific case, my mother-in-law, when it came to our children. But when there was interaction, we got things like my daughter's favorite color is orange. She's loved orange since she was a little girl. To know my mother-in-law is all things pink scape, like different versions of pink. Orange is not her favorite color. And it was weird. There was probably a good couple months time in my daughter's life where all of a sudden her favorite color was pink. We're like, well, okay, that's weird. But we have always said we want our kids to be who they are meant to be, not who we want them to turn into, right? Like, we're trying to let them find their own voice, all that fun stuff. And then I think it was to the point where it's been a couple months, and my daughter finally just looked at us and said, "Can I start liking orange again?" And we thought, well, that's weird. So my wife dug in, and come to find out that months previous, she was out at a shopping thing with my mother-in-law. We were with them, but we kind of let them have a little alone time. So we were either at the other end of the store, or maybe we're on the next store because we went to a mall. And My mother-in-law was like, they were shopping and my daughter picked something up that was orange and said, "Oh, this is really pretty." To which my mother-in-law pulled out of her hand and said, "Oh, no, that's orange. Orange is an ugly color. You don't like the color orange." And then replaced it with a pink something and said, "This is much better. This is the color that you should be liking." Well, even that one interaction had such an impact to my daughter that she gave up her favorite color for a few months. When my wife heard that, she hit the roof. And so she started having more of those interactions. And, I'm not going to get into the intimate details because first of all, I wasn't involved, but it was things like, "How dare you? You will not do this to my kid. She'll like whatever she likes. You don't like it. Keep your mouth shut. Don't give your opinion." I mean, it was harsh language. It was like, you've now crossed a line you should have never crossed. And so I bring this up just to kind of show that now it's almost like she couldn't control us. So she was trying to find a new way in to control us, which was through our kids. Unfortunately for her, that was the wrong avenue to go down because that almost just solidified the ultimate result of our relationship. So I think she thought, I can turn the kids, I can make the kids kind of help turn the parents. We'll get back on track here. That's how I kind of looked at it. The last time we went back for Christmas, and it was the last time, by this point, the behavior is getting weird. I think the older child was now married or getting close to being married. So family dynamic was about to change again. My mother-in-law's behavior got more erratic. So if you're listening to this, by any of your listeners listening to this that have small kids, or you don't want to hear some inappropriate, I would ask you to fast forward or pause now until you have your kids out of the room. I just wouldn't want to have anybody younger than, I would say, 18 hear this. Pause for a minute. So my mother-in-law, we were back. And at this time when I was there, I tried to spend as much time I could in the basement just because the less time I spent interacting with them felt like the better that everybody else got to interact with each other. And so I was retreating. I was kind of pulling myself out of there because one, it was easier. And two, I'm not biting my tongue anymore. So I can ruin Christmas just by me saying something. So I was trying to do what I can. Well, they wanted to read the Christmas story, and the Christmas story being, the birth of Jesus and everything that's going along with it, which is fine. We've heard that story thousands of times in my household. This was a weird dynamic. So she bought a book, and I don't really remember what the book was, but it was like the Christmas story, like an adult tale of the Christmas story. And then all of the kids were there and we're all listening, and we had young kids all the way up to adults. And she starts talking about, and I'm going to paraphrase, but it was kind of seared in my mind. She starts talking about how Mary and Joseph were riding on a donkey, and the donkey, was a bumpy ride, and every bump caused a pain for Mary. And she could feel the labor pains coming on, and they were getting stronger and stronger. And they finally found this stable that they could stay in. And it got to the point where, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to say it, like the birth pains kept coming, and then the mucus plug dislodged, and then there was fluid and blood coming out of Mary, and then Jesus's head crowned. And I mean, it was we finally said, stop. We gathered our kids and went downstairs because it was incredibly inappropriate, incredibly. And not only did we, but then some of their other kids were like, this is just like, stop telling the story. There's kids in there. And when my mother-in-law just like found out, oh, there's more people speaking up now, not just one or two, or, nobody speaking up. She quickly was like, you guys have taken this to a weird place. This is about our Savior. And it's like, you absolutely have no idea what even is acceptable now, because fine, have a bunch of adults, great, but you have kids. And me personally, I don't want to hear about those intricacies. Like, I understand how all that works. When I'm doing a Christmas story with my kids and I'm seeing the Christmas tree, that is not the time to go into a graphic detail of how a child is born. That was the last time we were back.
Yes. Kudos. Just the pure lack of judgment in your journey by her, period. But the lack of judgment, and the narcissist, even when they will just keep digging a deeper and deeper hole. Even if she had an inkling that was inappropriate, if she got a book and she didn't know what she was getting into, she was just going to get this new book. She starts reading it, it has all these details. The narcissistic personality is going to just dig deeper and deeper rather than to even admit that, oh, I screwed up and this book is inappropriate, because that is so against their grain. They're not able to do that, even at the risk of children, and probably don't even have a good sense of connection. I mean, a true narcissist truly may just be detached emotionally. They could put on the show, but to truly feel that, and even just the little dive into her discussion in the poor me stuff from when she got pregnant the first time, it's your wife and stuff. That's very consistent with that narcissism that developed very early for her. That was part of her journey early on, and the inability to even admit they're wrong, just keep digging the deeper hole. That's so sad.
Yeah, that is by far probably the most disturbing and kind of, like I said, the catalyst that was like, okay, so we did come back. I'm going to speed along now because I know we're over 2 hours, but just to kind of put a cap on this so we can wrap it up, or, if there's anything else specifically we need to talk about. We started spending less and less time going back. Kids got older, more grandkids were introduced to the mix. Unfortunately, her behavior, the focus eventually started coming off of us because we weren't around as much. There is one element here that I want to touch on, and I put this as the channel of communication from the family. Unfortunately, what it appears to us is that because we made a decision that at this time we're not going to have a relationship with my mother-in-law for a variety of reasons that I hope everybody who's listened to this can now understand, even at the surface level. We still allowed access through apps that we could monitor that she could reach out to our kids. That has since also stopped. I'd like to touch on that. But one thing I want to point out is when we finally was like, this is not working anymore, and this is not going to be a healthy relationship. And again, maybe not have been used in those exact words, but that was the tone. It was when we left, a family meeting was called about us. And so this was how I would perceive this. This was a last ditch effort to say, okay, I can no longer control or even pretend like I control these individuals. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cut them out of the ecosystem. And in doing that, my wife, myself, it was spun that we left the family, that we are leaving them, where it really is we just can't have a relationship with you. And that turned into, that's all of us, because for some reason, and I don't know if this is a typical trait or this is just specific to my mother-in-law, but when we had that conversation, like, we cannot have a healthy relationship with you, she translated that into, we can't have a healthy relationship with the entire family. And unfortunately, she positioned herself to be the hub of communication between herself, her husband, and the kids. And so she was kind of filtering through all of the communications. And what that's done is, for the most part, it has almost eliminated any kind of relationship that we've had with any of her brothers and sisters. There's a couple we stay in touch with, but for the most part, we believe that hub of communication has almost been poisoned. And it hasn't just been to the immediate family, to the extended family, because none of the aunts or uncles or even some of the cousins have really reached out, because we think the story's been told that we walked away. And I think another really important distinction here is, my mother-in-law says the right words. She just doesn't mean them. And I don't know if that's a narcissist or not, but she keeps saying when she reaches out, and it's getting less and less now. But at the very beginning, she would send text messages or, card, something. And it would be, we're praying for restitution. We're praying for restoration. And the thing is, she's waiting for restoration on our part to come back to her. She's not willing to do anything on her end. And so wishing for restoration all day long doesn't do anything when she's not willing to put a step forward to even meet us halfway. And until that happens, there's no point on our end to even look for restoration, because no change will take place. And so that's kind of where, as I take the foot off the gas of this whole 25-year story wrapped up in 2 hours, that's kind of where we left it, is we're not really proceeding with a relationship to her. And somehow that's been translated to most of the family, which is unfortunate. And then we've recently had to, because of a couple other issues that have come up that I don't think is really pertinent to this discussion, although I think it ties in, because how could it not? We've then kind of had our kids take her off of social media as well, because we had to safeguard our children against that, because it's no longer healthy, and it can actually be very damaging because of where she's at mentally today and the relationships that she has. And so this is the first and only time we've ever told our kids not to have contact with a family member, which has been really tough for us. But ultimately, our kids' safety and mental health is more important than anything. So we had to take that final step. But that's kind of where we're at as, January of 2025 in the story of my mother-in-law and who I believe to be a narcissist. So,
Well, it sounds like, given what you shared, that narcissism is definitely in the mix. There's sometimes similarities between narcissism and something called bipolar disorder. Borderline personality disorder. And there's some fine differences that might be in there that would be some discussion points of like where your mother-in-law fits within those two. But what you've described, what we've discussed, textbook narcissism. In terms of the children, again, you don't need my permission, but I think it's really important to recognize what the developmental ages are of them. And you can't risk someone who obviously distorts reality, obviously lacks insight, and will say what they want and switch the story depending on what they want to have the outcome be. Is super, super important and valuable. My challenge might be, and maybe you've tried it, would be something like reaching out to those other individual family members if you want relationships with them, and then they can do with it what they want, and you can know that you tried. If that's anything that your wife is interested in that way, not that you wouldn't sincerely do that, but you wouldn't have to put like your whole heart into it, but you can say, hey, we want to have a relationship with you, not because we want to rehash our side of the story. We didn't choose to leave, but we'd still like to have a relationship with you or with you. And if that gets turned into you trying to bully them into choosing you over the mom, then you just let it go. But again, just the narcissist dynamic is very much like you're describing the situation. And I feel sad for you.
Well, and I agree with your assessment. And what's really interesting is that she almost set up the boundaries of her side versus our side. So it has made it really hard when we have reached out to the other siblings. And again, there's some that we have relationships with. There's some that we don't. And I firmly believe the ones that we don't is because this boundary's already been set. The well's been poisoned. When we reached out, it's either met with no interest or even almost like an angry response. And the weird thing about all of this is I firmly believe I could pick up the phone, grovel, apologize to my mother-in-law, and the next thing that would happen is the phone would start ringing with these siblings that didn't want to have a relationship, because in their eyes, and maybe that's a little overstatement, but I think you get my point. Like in their eyes, I could see them saying, everything is right in the world now because we came to our senses. We acknowledged how much we hurt my mother-in-law. And now we've come to terms with just how devastating our actions were. And we're truly sorry for them. And so therefore all is right in the world. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen because that's not reality and that's not healthy. Not that you said that, but that's just to finish off my thought process.
Right. And there's not a right or a wrong way, right? It's about making choices that fit for what you and your wife would like to have happen. And based upon what you've described, the reality is those who are buying into and continuing with this relationship and lacking boundaries with your mother-in-law really are doing the things that you all did for years. You're perpetuating the situation. You're enabling her to continue in her distorted pattern. And she's going to continue to have that much power and control only as long as people allow that to happen.
Now, in our conversation, I've heard a couple of things. I've heard about setting boundaries, saying no, protecting yourself. I would love to give some real tips, tricks, coping skills, something. If anyone that's listening feels like they are in this position, they are stuck in one of these ecosystems of someone who is displaying narcissistic tendencies, what can that person do to be okay and to get some help?
I think some of the key things to do is to recognize some patterns. Like if you're in a situation and you perceive something that really feels wrong and you can logically, it doesn't make sense, or you're just shock and awe, find a safe person that you can talk to, much like Malin did with you. find that person and talk to them and check it out, because we're going to feel like we're going crazy. If you feel like you're going crazy in relationships, chances are there is something going on. Like if it just doesn't add up, or you feel like you're consistently wrong, or it's not consistent with what your value system are, those kinds of things, check it out with other people. Get resources from friendship and feedback. There are a lot of self-help books, obviously, out there about narcissism. I would make sure that there's credentials behind any YouTube videos, any podcasts, and do a variety of them. Not get your news from TikTok necessarily, but be willing to be open-minded to do that. There are a few good resources that I will send you that I find are very basic and very helpful, if that's okay. And then however you can share those. But I think those distorted thinking, where like there's consistently splitting people against each other. There's a good and a bad. There's all or nothing thinking, overgeneralizations, catastrophizing, self-victimization. When you see those patterns, I think it's really important to just check those out with other people. And then in terms of help, I think knowledge and information, but use credentialed and legitimate resources and multiple resources, because again, you're going to increase the reliability of it. You need to make sure that you don't know for sure if this particular writer or professional has an agenda or not. So I use multiple resources. And then also, if you have safe people, work with them to find those resources and don't go through it alone. The biggest thing is to bounce things off of people, find someone that you can go through it with, and kind of just stay true to you and recognize that you are good enough and that this is not about you. It's really about their stuff. And it's important to put those boundaries on.
I have a question for you too, Krista. I know we talked about how it's important to reach out, to somebody outside of that ecosystem or outside of that environment, which is very helpful. And to pick on Jamie a little bit, because, I have to in every episode. What advice would you give to somebody who thinks they are suffering in a narcissistic relationship and they do reach out to that person? What advice would you give? Because that ultimately turned out, and it's not that I didn't think that Jamie believed me. It was just hard for Jamie to, in her brain, the stories that were being told versus the person she was seeing. It's hard to kind of put those two together when they're so diabolically different from one another. But having that person was what really helped me be like, okay, I'm not crazy. Like when I tell these stories, they'd be like, oh my goodness, did that really happen? It's like, okay, finally, like you're seeing it. So just take a minute to say, what advice would you give to those individuals that somebody does reach out to? Like, what would you say to them to kind of help them support their friends, family members, whoever it is that's reaching out for help? Because I think that is the crucial piece, at least dealing with this environment. It was almost an anchor into reality. And I don't even know if Jamie at the time knew how much of an anchor it was just by her responding and just a casual conversation sometimes. But it did. It kind of kept me grounded to say, okay, this is really warped and not how it's supposed to be. So yeah, what advice would you give to somebody like that?
I think in most any situation related to mental health and dynamics like this, the receiver of the information, it's super important to just be with the person where they're at. The person sharing the story, not to refute it, not to argue or disagree, but to hear them and tell me another story about this. And hear multiple accounts of it before you respond. So be there with them, believe them, be supportive, and tell me more about this. Those kinds of responses. So that way you have dots that you can connect versus not believing them up front, but then being able to say, you know what, she doesn't show these sides when I've been around for years. She's always just been very nice and everything. And then reassure the person that's sharing with you that I believe you, but this is so different than what I would have thought would be. But you know what? I'm informed enough to know that now or whatever, that people have social faces. People only present to me what they want me to see. So there isn't very many stories that somebody could tell me that somebody's done that I'm not going to go, it's possible. But the A through L, I would never believe this would happen. And I'm still going to stick to that. But I'm going to also recognize I'm going to take this new information because I only get what people want me to see about them. And I would be straight up. If I'm the person receiving the information, be with them where they're at, hear their story, hear multiple stories if possible, validate their feelings, and normalize it. Wow, if I were in that situation, I would have responded similarly, or I would have done this, or that sounds like it was a horrible situation. So validation and normalization, and then saying, this is different than the person I've ever seen, but we only see what people want us to see. I think those like 4 or 5 things can be really helpful if you're the receiver of that information.
Well, and I think unfortunately in our, I guess, as Malin and I were going through this as friends, we were so young when, you know what I mean? Like we just didn't know better. I think we both probably had a pretty trusting disposition for most people, and you know what I mean? So I definitely, and I don't even think it was till last week that, or when we recorded the last episode, that I was like, oh yeah, I totally was like, the only thing is that I knew my friend long enough to know that he doesn't lie to me. He doesn't tell me stories. I mean, he will exaggerate once in a while, but it's always so obvious that it's exaggerated. And I knew, that what he was saying is what he was experiencing. But, also, I don't know that I would have known what to do in that space either, other than just, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? That was really all I could give him. And it sounds like that can be enough just to help someone feel validated and heard and understood. So,
well, and
yeah.
And that was very helpful. And, one of the things that you're probably kind of start wrapping up here, but one of the things that I just want to leave with everyone who's listening to this, and probably myself, is it's okay to recognize when somebody is manipulating you or is a manipulator. Even the people that you love and trust, sometimes they manipulate you. And I think for the longest time, that was a word that I skated around because I didn't want to label my mother-in-law as a manipulator. She's a masterclass in manipulation. And I think that's all the articles, everything I read, that is a common trait with narcissists is that they are a master manipulation or manipulator. And for whoever's listening to this, it's okay to label something the truth. If that's reality, if that's true, even though it may feel horrible and ugly, because I shied away from even talking about this more or being more direct with my mother-in-law for so long, because I didn't want to call her an ugly word like a manipulator, but that's exactly what it was and what it is. And I think the sooner people come to grips with that, and they I think I'm going to use your word, normalize it, or they start saying it more often, to say, you are manipulating me and that is not okay. The first couple times is going to feel really ugly on your part, but then the more you do it, the more they're going to understand. By even saying it out loud, it just shows they can no longer manipulate you anymore. And then I can't say they won't start doing another tactic, but at least that one may subside or be significantly reduced. But that would be my only advice, if that makes sense. Like, don't shy away from recognizing and saying someone is manipulating you and they are a manipulator.
And when it's the truth, it's the truth. And it's okay to speak the truth. The other thing is, you also can learn to use words and phrases depending, especially early in this growth process, of like, this really feels like you're wanting me to do what you want me to do. This is another situation where I had set out what I was going to do, and now you're changing it to try to guilt me, so I'll do what you want me to do. It's manipulation. You just don't call it manipulation.
Yeah, yours way is a lot better. I was like, you're a manipulator, me.
Well, I think it's also important to know we don't know what we don't know. So it's so important to give ourselves grace, because it is a journey. Life is a journey, and good or bad. I don't use qualitative words I don't think there's a good and a bad. Whatever this journey is, helpful or unhelpful, I've just lived it, and I've gotten lots of therapy through working with people forever and working with systems and groups forever. So it's a lifelong journey, and I get to know, and I have the opportunity to have many experiences that help me to remember how much I don't know and how much I haven't experienced, as well as that I get to learn vicariously from every single person that I've worked with. And we don't know what we don't know until we're in the middle of it, and we do the best we can with the knowledge that we have.
No, I've been talking a lot, so I think I'm just going to kind of start the process of us wrapping up. And before we go down further, Chris, I just want to say thank you. A lot of this hard work, my wife and I had to do ourselves, and trial and error, and we kind of bumped up against it. But even a lot of without even knowing, other than the information I provided, and I recognize it's one-sided. You've said, in a normal setting, you'd have multiple, but I appreciate you having just this conversation. You validated a lot. And even though these are my words. This is not what you made me feel, but this is just how I'm going to phrase it. Even though you can't 100% trust what I said because you're only getting one point of view, you have no idea how much you validated everything and you're hitting the mark head on with your assessment. Makes me feel, again, some of my decisions I've had to do, some of my wife's decisions she's had to do now, and with ourselves and with our kids, it's okay, and we did the right choice. Because again, there's those whispers that come in. Yeah, but she's your wife's mom. She's your kid's grandmother. Like, you almost start doubting yourself when things finally do calm down, and things are going okay. You almost start second guessing, like, oh, did I do the right thing? And then you have to stop and remember, you're having these good times because of the decisions, because of those hard decisions you had to do, is now why you get these good seasons now. And so thank you for coming on here. Thank you for walking through this and validating and making me feel like, yes, we did accomplish something and it's good. And I got to just keep reminding myself that. So I so much appreciate you coming on and having this conversation. So thank you.
Well, I very much appreciate the invitation, and I'm very glad to have known Jamie for several years and glad to have gotten to meet you. I hope that this is helpful, and I'd love to come on again sometime if it's...
Yes, absolutely. I do have one question before we sign off. I'm curious because everyone who is displaying narcissistic tendencies are a son or a daughter or a mother or a father or a brother or a sister, someone that people care about. And we have talked a lot about how to recognize that. But I guess what I haven't heard is, how do we help and care for someone in our life that is experiencing this or struggling with this, that we care about, we love them, and we want them to be okay? How do we move forward in relationship, and how do we keep ourselves safe, but also work toward positive outcomes with that family member or person we care about?
It's interesting because I almost extended things because I was going to respond to Malin with something related to this. Is one of the things I would encourage with the kids is, in this process, there's going to be a point where they're developmentally appropriate. It will be developmentally appropriate for them to make decisions and for you to have certain conversations with them. I think it's really, really important to say, you can love grandma. We don't have to like the behavior. These are the behaviors that aren't helpful, and this is why we have this boundary. We can love her, we can send letters, we can, whatever your boundary is with her, but the behaviors aren't okay. We love you, but the behaviors aren't okay. Likewise, if you have that loved one, you can demonstrate that at some point, just saying, I do love you, but when you do this, as specific as possible, when you insist that I come to Christmas when I get to have the opportunity to spend time with just my family, and I want to come and see you, I just want it to be slightly altered. Love you, but that isn't something I'm going to do right now. And that's your responsibility. That's you, as a person talking to my loved one, that's my responsibility. And it's not to keep them happy. I am not responsible for others' emotions. I'm responsible to be assertive, caring, kind, but also keep myself and my family safe. I'm going to assert myself saying, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. And it's going to be in as honest a fashion as possible. But try not to say, you're a bad little boy. You're a bad mom. I love you, Mom, but I don't like these behaviors, and I can't have my kids around them.
Okay. That's really good. I can't say that my own mother was in this space specifically, but I always felt like there was a time where I had to cut her out and not go, no contact, right? And have no interaction at all. But there was a time where that was necessary. And then there was a time where it was necessary for me to change that, or to start building that bridge with healthier boundaries in place. And so, I guess I see a lot of, along with the uncredentialed content, I see a lot of, this is how you spot a narcissist, and then cut it off, but not a whole lot of the after. And, those are people that need connection too. And I just wanted to get some feedback on that. So,
well, and I think I like the way you described that. In our own growth journey, we're going to know what we can tolerate, because part of our cutting off is to protect, right? Because we can't continue to live that, and we can't have the emotional roller coaster that creates for us or our wife or our other loved ones that aren't the one that has a narcissistic personality, right? And so it's protection. But once we're in our growth journey, and our family is in a safe space, it's okay to try it, but you want to have minimal regrets. My guideline is typically in your own growth journey, what is minimal regrets? And maybe it's right now we're going to cut off. And then at some point we're going to let them know how long we're going to cut it off. And then at some point it's like, okay, parents will start to engage or I will start to engage, but there's going to be these clear boundaries and I get to help determine them. And it's going to be framed in love. Like, I love you enough that I do want this relationship, but I love myself and my family enough that I want them to love you and not have to see this manipulation or this bad stuff. Some frame of that. It's hard.
It's hard to ask that question though, Jamie, somebody that's been through it. So I'm glad you asked that because I was not, even now being towards the tail end, I wasn't thinking those terms. So
well, you're not even close to the tail end. Just saying. You have a long ways in this journey to go with her.
All right. Somebody mute her mic. Who kept her hurt? No, just kidding.
Tail end of the podcast, maybe. Well, and truthfully, Malin,
okay.
In all honesty, you have been the one that has been, you have kind of shown that to me through all of this, is that it's not that we don't care for her. It's not that I want bad things for her. I just need to protect my family and I need to protect myself. And you have been, I've heard that from you lots over the last several years as you're going through this. So you might not have been in that space right now because we're rehashing, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But, you've been in that space and you've kind of taught me in that way too. So I just, you always want restoration, right? I mean, that's the goal. These are not people that are just nebulous. They're people that are important to us for a reason. So anything we can do to have those healthy interactions is a good thing. As long as you can protect yourself, I think that's super important too.
And another real quick conceptualization could be grief. Reality is your mother-in-law is not the mother-in-law you envisioned. Your life with your in-laws is way different. So you're grieving an unknown what you expected. You expected this, and so you're grieving, and you've grieved for years. And so right now, you're over it, right? But think of the grief process, and it's not like the strict process, right? It's not consecutive, and it's all over the places, right? Denial, anger, bargaining, if she just would, depression, acceptance. All those 5 things are going to be interwoven in this process and in your continued journey. There's going to be days when you're just angry and days you might have a little empathy, days you're like, maybe if we just call her or your wife, take your experience times exponentially because your wife has still never had those needs met.
Well, and man, I feel like we could keep going. I'm really trying to wrap it up here. But even what you just said there, to expect the fact that it's not just a forward motion for grief. There's going to be things, and we've experienced this, where you get to one stage and something happens and it pulls you back into another. And so once you're done with one stage, it doesn't mean you're done forever. And there's circumstances and situations and people who may pull you in and out of those different, you could go through anger 4 or 5 times. Who knows? I know this whole conversation that we've had, there was a lot of times I was in and out of anger because of, I thought I was over it and then something pulled me back, or a situation happened and I was right back where in that stage. And I think that's normal and that's acceptable too. Like, don't just think that when you're done being angry, that's the last time you're going to be angry about it. It kind of ebbs and flows. So I think that's a good point too.
Yeah. And remember, life continues and life's a journey. So if there's an illness or if there's an accident or there's something traumatic that happens in her life, you're in the middle of major decisions, right? So off task, but I would encourage, like, I call it pre-learning or preparing, like figure out those scenarios that are going to be those exceptions to living yourself with these boundaries for now. So if you got the phone call and X happened, how are we going to handle this? So you're on the same page, you're in an emotionally ready state, and it doesn't become a win-loss battle. Oh, if we give in just because this happened, it's not about that. But if you pre-learn those, pre-prepare for the situations, accident, illness, whatever, I think it'd be really helpful in your journey as you go forward.
That's super smart. Thank you for mentioning that, because that's something really, I don't know that I was prepared for those kind of things when it happened to me. So that's a good idea. Well, again, Krista, thank you so much for joining us. I have appreciated your expertise in this topic, and I am positive I've already got in the back of my head another episode we'd love to have you join us for. So we'll schedule that right after here. But that's awesome. Awesome. Thank you. So with that, we hope that this was good information for you. We hope that you learned something. And, you know, I don't know. It's I hope it dispels some of the myths that come along with this topic, just based on all of the pop culture, I don't know, content that's out there about it. But we sure thank you for joining us and hope you will join us again next week or on the roundtable. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Whoops, I messed it up.
Great. Now I have to redo it now.